Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, so today we're heading back in time, way back. Ancient Egypt,
Yeah.
but not just the usual stuff.
Yeah, we're going deeper.
Exactly. We're diving into their cosmology, their beliefs about the universe and how it all works. And of course, we can't talk about ancient Egypt without talking about those incredible pyramids, right?
Right.
You guys have sent us some fascinating material for this one. We've got transcripts from documentaries, research by a guy named Robert Bauval.
Fascinating stuff.
Oh, yeah. And there are even some hints about, get this, star alignments, like how the pyramids might be connected to the stars.
It's amazing how much these sources challenge the whole idea of pyramids just being, tombs.
Tombs for pharaohs, yeah, that's what we always hear.
Right. But the ancient Egyptians were clearly thinking on a much, much grander scale.
Yeah.
They had this cosmic vision in mind.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, picture this. These pyramids were built with 13 million tons of rock.
Wow.
13 million. That's enough to build the center of London.
That's hard to even imagine.
I know. So it makes you wonder if burying a pharaoh was really the only goal here.
Exactly. And that's where Robert Bauval's work gets really interesting. He suggests that the pyramids,
Yeah.
they were actually designed to reflect a much deeper link between Earth and, well, the stars.
Whoa. Okay, so is this where that whole Orion correlation theory comes in?
You got it.
The one where the layout of the three main pyramids at Giza, they're like a mirror image of the three stars in Orion's belt?
Yeah. And it's not just, a general resemblance either. We're talking precision here, like a precise alignment with Orion's position as it would have appeared in the sky. Get this, around 10,500 BC.
Wait, hold on. 10,500 BC, but the pyramids weren't even built then. That's thousands of years earlier.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
So how is it even possible? I mean, did they have time machines back then or something?
No time machines.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes down to something called precession. Basically, the Earth's axis, it wobbles very slowly over time.
Yeah.
And that wobble, it changes how we see the stars from down here on Earth. So the pyramids, they were actually designed to match a sky that existed long before they were built.
It's like they had some kind of ancient knowledge, like a blueprint from a forgotten time.
Right.
But what about the pyramids themselves? Like, what's inside them that points to this connection with the stars?
Well, within the Great Pyramid, there are these shafts. Some scholars, they just think they were for ventilation.
Makes sense, to keep the air flowing.
Yeah, but Bauval, he has a much more fascinating theory. He believes those shafts, they were intentionally aligned with specific stars.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Which stars are we talking about?
Remember Orion?
The constellation.
Yep, one shaft points directly at it, or, well, at where it would have been in the sky back then. The ancient Egyptians, they called this constellation Osiris.
Osiris, hold on, isn't that the name of a god?
It is.
Okay, and there was another shaft too, right?
Yes, that one aligns with Sirius, which the Egyptians, they associated with the goddess Isis.
Osiris and Isis. Okay, yeah, now those names are definitely ringing a bell.
They're pretty important in Egyptian mythology. The myth of Osiris, in fact, is key to understanding their whole belief system about the afterlife.
Remind me about Osiris. Who was he again?
Osiris was the god of the underworld. And his story, oh man, it's full of betrayal, death, and then this amazing resurrection, all thanks to Isis.
Okay, yeah. It's all coming back to me now. And didn't Sirius, Isis disappear from the night sky for a while? Something like 70 days?
You're right, it does. And the Egyptians, they connected that disappearance to the flooding of the Nile.
Yeah.
The floods that were super important for their agriculture.
Right, the lifeblood of Egypt. So when Sirius reappeared, that was like a symbol of rebirth. Okay.
Exactly. It was like the Nile's floods bringing life back to the land. And get this, the 70 days that Sirius is hidden, it's the exact same amount of time it took to mummify a pharaoh.
Whoa, hold on. Are you serious?
Totally.
So they saw the whole Sirius cycle, the disappearing and reappearing, as like a celestial mirror of their own mummification rituals.
Yeah.
And the rebirth of Egypt itself.
It's incredible, right? It really shows how deeply their understanding of death and the afterlife was intertwined with the cosmos. Like they saw everything as connected.
I'm telling you, this is all so fascinating, but I gotta be honest, it's a lot to process. We've got star alignments, ancient gods, mummies, and a whole lot of symbolism going on here.
It's true. There are so many layers to unpack. And we haven't even talked about the cenotaph of Osiris yet.
The what of Osiris?
The cenotaph's another piece of this puzzle that sheds even more light on their beliefs.
Okay, a cenotaph. That's a new one for me. What is that exactly?
Well, a cenotaph, it's basically like a symbolic tomb. a monument for someone, but they're buried somewhere else. And according to the sources you gave us, there's this site near the Sphinx. It was intentionally left empty, like they built this elaborate tomb-like structure, but for a god, a cenotaph dedicated to Osiris himself.
Wait, so they built this whole fancy tomb thing, but for a god? Who isn't, a physical being? I don't get it. Why go through all that trouble?
Remember, for the ancient Egyptians, Osiris wasn't just about death. He represented resurrection, rebirth, that whole cyclical nature of life.
Ah, okay.
So this cenotaph might have been their way of symbolically representing that cycle, a place where the pharaoh could connect with Osiris on a spiritual level and ensure his own resurrection.
So less about a physical burial and more about a spiritual transformation.
Exactly. And the fact that it's right by the Sphinx, which is already mysterious as heck, well, it just adds another layer of intrigue to it all.
Speaking of intrigue, the sources mention these wooden statuettes with some, let's just say, prominent features. What's the deal with those?
You mean the ones with the...
Oh, yeah, those.
Right. The erect phallus. Yeah, it might seem a little out of place to us, but you got to remember, Osiris' story involves him being dismembered, and then Isis puts him back together. So the phallus, in this context, it's not about what we might think. It symbolizes regeneration, the life force, the thing that ultimately leads to resurrection.
Wow. So even those details that seem kind of, explicit, they were actually part of a much deeper spiritual meaning.
Exactly. It really makes you think about how different their worldview was from ours today. For them, sexuality wasn't something separate. It was an integral part of life, the natural world. It represented fertility, creation, that whole continuation of the cycle, life, death, and rebirth. It was all connected.
This whole concept of a cyclical worldview is fascinating. Did they have specific rituals or practices, like to tap into this cycle, to connect with Osiris and ensure their own resurrection?
That's a great question. And the sources, they do hint at some pretty fascinating rituals. They mention these underground tunnels, a place called Rostau. It's described as the entrance to the underworld. And there's this ceremony, the opening of the mouth ceremony. It was meant to symbolically revive the deceased pharaoh.
It sounds like they were going through a kind of dress rehearsal for death, facing their mortality head on. But tell me more about this Rostau and the opening of the mouth thing. What were those all about?
Rostau, it was considered super sacred, a point of transition between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, like a place of initiation, transformation.
And what about the opening of the mouth ceremony? It sounds pretty intense.
Oh, it was a big deal. They would perform it on the mummy. The priests would use special tools and incantations to symbolically open the deceased's mouth, their eyes, ears, nose. Basically, they were restoring their senses for the afterlife.
Like giving them the tools they needed to navigate that whole other world.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that the pharaoh's journey through the pyramid all the way to the king's chamber, it might have been part of a much larger initiation ritual, a symbolic death and rebirth experience.
So the pyramid itself becomes a vehicle for spiritual transformation, a gateway between the earthly realm and the cosmos. Amazing. But wait, what about the afterlife itself? What happened to the soul after all of this?
Well, the ancient Egyptians, they believed that the heart of the deceased would be weighed on a scale against the feather of truth.
A feather.
Yeah. It represented Ma'at, the goddess of cosmic order.
So it's like a cosmic judgment day, good deeds versus bad deeds.
Yeah, you could say that. If the heart was lighter than the feather, good news. The soul would ascend to a blissful afterlife.
Sounds nice.
But if it was heavier, weighed down by bad deeds, that's where things got scary.
Uh-oh.
It would be devoured by this terrifying creature called Ammit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. Not a good way to go.
Yikes. So they took the concept of moral accountability pretty seriously.
Absolutely. And, this whole idea of judgment after death, it pops up in a lot of cultures and spiritual traditions, speaks to that deep human desire for justice, I guess. The belief that our actions have consequences, even after this life.
All of this talk about the afterlife and judgment, it makes me think about those hieroglyphs you see in tombs and temples. Are those just, recordings of events? Or are they something more?
That's where we get into the really exciting stuff. For the ancient Egyptians, hieroglyphs, they weren't just a writing system. They were a language of the divine.
Ooh, okay, now I'm really hooked. A language of the divine. Tell me more about that. How did they use it, and what secrets might it hold?
Well, that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive. We'll be back after a short break.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. I'm eager to dive into this whole language of the divine thing with you, ready to unlock some ancient secrets.
Absolutely. Last time we were talking about how hieroglyphs, they weren't just a way to write for the ancient Egyptians. They believed it was a way to actually communicate with the cosmos. I'm dying to know how that worked.
Well, think about it this way. Our alphabet, it's got 26 letters, right?
Yeah. A, B, C.
And those represent sounds. But the Egyptians, they had over 780 hieroglyphs. Each one was a symbol, often representing a whole concept, a deity, sometimes even a whole story.
So it's like each symbol is a little puzzle piece that unlocks a bigger meaning.
Exactly. Now imagine trying to express these, really complex ideas about the universe, the afterlife, using only 26 letters.
Yeah, that would be tough.
The ancient Egyptians, they needed a much richer system, one that could convey multiple layers of meaning all at the same time.
That makes sense. But what kinds of things were they trying to communicate with the cosmos? Was it like sending messages to the gods?
It's probably more nuanced than that. The sources suggest they saw hieroglyphs as a way to tap into the very fabric of creation, to understand the fundamental principles that govern the universe.
Okay, so it wasn't just about like sending prayers or asking for favors. It was about seeking deeper knowledge, understanding the universe on a more profound level.
That's a great way to put it. And this knowledge, it wasn't for everyone either. The sources suggest it was often kept secret, passed down through initiation rituals. Only those who were properly prepared could access it.
That sounds a bit like a mystery school.
Yeah.
Were there specific places where this knowledge was taught?
The sources do mention a few interesting locations. Remember Rostow, that place we talked about, the entrance to the underworld?
Yeah.
Well, it seems that might have been a symbolic representation of a place of initiation, where knowledge of the language of the divine was passed on.
So not a literal underworld, but a symbolic one. A place where initiates could undergo a sort of death and rebirth experience.
Exactly, like going through a metaphorical journey to access deeper truths. And you know that opening of the mouth ceremony we discussed earlier?
The one they performed on the mummy?
Yeah, that one. Well, the sources suggest that was connected to this idea of accessing hidden knowledge, too.
Really? How so?
Remember, that ceremony was about symbolically restoring the deceased's senses.
Yeah.
Well, some scholars believe it also represented a kind of awakening, an opening of the inner senses, to perceive the unseen world.
So it wasn't just about preparing for the physical afterlife, but also about opening oneself up to a higher level of awareness, even while still living.
That's a really insightful interpretation. It suggests that the Egyptians, they saw death not as an end, but as a transition to a different state of being,
Yeah.
and that certain rituals could help prepare individuals for that transition, both physically and spiritually.
It's all starting to come together now. The pyramids, the star alignments, the myths, the rituals, the language of hieroglyphs, they're all interconnected, all pointing to this profound belief in a cosmos that's full of meaning and purpose.
And that's what makes studying ancient Egypt so fascinating, right? It challenges our modern perspective and makes us consider the possibility that there's just more to reality than we think.
It definitely makes you wonder what secrets we might be overlooking in our own lives. Maybe we've lost touch with that sense of wonder and mystery that the ancient Egyptians embraced so fully.
Perhaps. But maybe by exploring their wisdom, their way of seeing the world, we can rediscover that sense of wonder within ourselves.
It's definitely food for thought. So what other insights can we glean from these hieroglyphs? Are there any specific symbols or stories that stand out in the sources you've looked at?
Oh, there's so many fascinating examples. But one that I find particularly resonant is the story of Thoth. Remember him, the god of knowledge, wisdom, and writing, the one who gave humanity the gift of language.
Right, he was like the divine scribe recording the history of the universe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting about Thoth is that he was often depicted with the head of an ibis, that bird with the long beak.
Right.
And ibises, they're known for their ability to probe deep into the mud, searching for food.
I never thought about it that way. So is that symbolism connected to the idea of like seeking deeper knowledge, delving into the hidden mysteries of the universe?
Absolutely. It suggests that true knowledge, it's not always obvious. Sometimes you have to dig deep, look beneath the surface to uncover the hidden truths.
That's a beautiful metaphor. It reminds me of how archaeologists have to literally dig into the earth to uncover remnants of the past. And just like those archaeologists, maybe we need to do some digging within ourselves to uncover the hidden wisdom that lies within.
That's a powerful insight. The Egyptians, they believed that truth could be found both within and without. That by exploring the outer world, we can also discover more about our inner selves.
And maybe by understanding the symbolism of their language, we can begin to unlock some of those inner truths for ourselves.
Precisely. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of hieroglyphs,
Yeah.
their use in magical practices.
Magic. Okay, now we're talking. Tell me more about how the Egyptians used hieroglyphs for magic. Did they think they could actually manipulate reality with these symbols?
Oh, it wasn't quite as straightforward as that. Their understanding of magic was deeply intertwined with their cosmology,
Hmm.
you know, their beliefs about how everything was interconnected.
So it wasn't like, waving a wand and making things disappear.
Not exactly. For them, magic was more about aligning oneself with the forces of nature,
Mm.
about tapping into the underlying principles that govern the universe.
And how did hieroglyphs fit into that?
They believed that certain symbols held specific powers, and that by writing or uttering those symbols in the right way, you could invoke those powers and influence events.
So it was like using language to program reality.
That's a really interesting way to put it, and it really highlights how much power they attributed to words and symbols.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit it also seems incredibly complex. How did they keep track of all those symbols and their meanings? Did they have like dictionaries or grammar books like we do today?
They definitely had systems for organizing and teaching their language. The sources mention something called the House of Life, which was basically a school for scribes.
Ah, so that's where they learned to read, write, and interpret hieroglyphs.
Exactly. Becoming a scribe was a big deal in ancient Egypt. They were the keepers of knowledge, the ones who could bridge the gap between the human and the divine.
I can see why they were held in such high regard. But even with all that training, there must have been some mysteries surrounding hieroglyphs, right? Some secrets that were lost over time.
Of course. And that's what makes studying them so intriguing. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, trying to decipher a code that's been hidden for centuries.
And sometimes we might only be getting a glimpse of the bigger picture, right? Like with those shafts in the Great Pyramid, they might hold meanings we haven't even begun to grasp yet.
Exactly. There's still so much we don't know about ancient Egypt, and new discoveries are being made all the time.
It's exciting to think about what secrets might still be out there waiting to be uncovered.
It is. And maybe by studying their wisdom, their way of seeing the world, we can unlock some hidden truths about ourselves and the universe we live in.
This has been incredible. It's amazing how much we can learn from a civilization that existed thousands of years ago.
I agree. Their insights into cosmology, spirituality, the power of language. It's all just as relevant today as it was back then.
So as we wrap up this exploration, I'm left with one final thought. If the ancient Egyptians could communicate with the cosmos through their language of the divine, what does that say about the power of language in our own lives?
That's a great question to ponder. Perhaps it's a reminder to be mindful of the words we use, the stories we tell ourselves, even the symbols we surround ourselves with. Because in a way, we're all writing our own stories, aren't we?
Yeah,
Shaping our realities with the language of our thoughts and actions.
that's a really powerful takeaway. It makes you realize we all have the potential to tap into that same creative energy, that same universal language that the ancient Egyptians embraced so fully.
Exactly. And who knows what wonders we might unlock if we dare to explore that potential within ourselves.
And we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into the mysteries of ancient Egyptian cosmology and their language of the divine.
Absolutely. It's amazing how much depth there is to this topic, right?
I know. I'm still thinking about how these hieroglyphs were more than just writing for them. It was like a way to connect with the universe on this really profound level.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? And one of the most common places we see those hieroglyphs is in their tombs. Those elaborate tombs often filled with scenes of the afterlife.
Oh, right. With the weighing of the heart and that terrifying creature, what was it called?
Amit, the devourer of souls. Pretty intense imagery.
Seriously. But it also tells us a lot about how the Egyptians viewed the afterlife, doesn't it? It wasn't just some passive state of being, it was a continuation of life, just in a different form.
Exactly. And they believed that the things they did in this life, their actions, had a direct impact on their experiences after death.
So those tomb paintings, they weren't just there for decoration, they were like instructions, maybe even warnings for how to navigate the afterlife.
Right. And the hieroglyphs that went along with those images, they were crucial for understanding the deeper meaning, providing context, explanations, spells, prayers, you name it.
You mentioned spells. Earlier, you were talking about how the Egyptians actually used hieroglyphs in their magic. Can you give us some specific examples? Like what kind of magical things were they trying to do?
Well, one really common way they used hieroglyphs in their magical practices was for protection. Like, They'd inscribe amulets and other objects with specific symbols that were believed to ward off evil spirits or just bad luck in general.
So like wearing your lucky charm, but with a whole lot more spiritual meaning behind it.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about personal protection. They also used hieroglyphs in rituals for all sorts of things.
Mm.
Healing, fertility, abundance, even trying to influence the weather.
It's like they had a symbol for everything, but did they actually believe that these symbols held, like, a power of their own?
It's more likely they saw the symbols as a way to access and channel a power that already existed within the cosmos. Remember, their whole worldview was about interconnectedness,
Yeah.
tapping into those forces of nature.
Right. It was about working with the universe, not trying to control it.
Precisely. And they believed that using certain hieroglyphs, particularly in rituals, was a way to kind of align yourself with these cosmic forces, to harness that power for a desired outcome.
All of this is so fascinating. But it also seems, well, really complex. How did they even keep track of all these symbols and what they meant? Did they have, like, dictionaries or grammar books like we do today?
Oh, they definitely had systems for teaching and organizing their language. The sources mention something called the House of Life. Basically, it was a school for scribes where they learned to read, write, and interpret hieroglyphs.
So becoming a scribe was a pretty prestigious gig in ancient Egypt.
Oh, yeah. They were the keepers of knowledge, the ones who could bridge the gap between the human world and the divine.
I can see why they were so respected. But even with all that training, there must have been some things about hieroglyphs that were still mysterious, right? Secrets that were lost to time.
Of course. And that's what makes studying them so exciting. It's like putting together a giant puzzle, trying to crack a code that's been hidden for centuries.
And sometimes we're probably only seeing a tiny piece of the bigger picture. Like those shafts in the Great Pyramid, we talked about them earlier. They could have meanings we haven't even started to grasp.
Absolutely. There's so much we still don't know about ancient Egypt. New discoveries are being made all the time.
It's mind-blowing to think what other secrets might still be out there, just waiting to be unearthed, literally.
It really is. And maybe by studying the ancient Egyptians, their wisdom, how they saw the world, we might even unlock some hidden truths about ourselves, about the universe we're all a part of.
This deep dive has been amazing. Seriously, it's incredible how much we can still learn from a civilization that existed thousands of years ago.
I agree. And, their insights into cosmology, spirituality, the power of language, all of that is just as relevant today as it was back then.
So as we wrap up our exploration, I keep coming back to this one thought. If the ancient Egyptians could actually communicate with the cosmos through their language of the divine, what does that tell us about the power of language in our own lives today?
That's a great question to think about. It might be a reminder to pay attention to the words we use, the stories we tell ourselves, even the symbols that we surround ourselves with. In a way, we're all writing our own stories.
Right.
We're shaping our own realities with the language of our thoughts and actions.
That's a really powerful takeaway. It makes you realize that we all have the potential to tap into that same creative energy, that same universal language that the Egyptians embraced so fully.
Exactly. And who knows what amazing things we could accomplish if we just start exploring that potential within ourselves.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive, but it feels like this is just the beginning of a much longer journey of exploration.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Who knows what other mysteries are out there waiting to be discovered.
To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the universe. Until next time.